My name is Boris and I'm IUCN Regional Director for Europe, and I'll be your host for today. I'm very excited to see you all here, and big thanks from our side for you to being here and prioritizing this event among so many competing events. In the next 60 minutes, so we will try to shed a little bit more light on the recent developments in terms of a circular economy and its linkages with biodiversity and climate, something that we are still exploring. So making progress, that's still exploring, and we're also going to present some of the most recent findings and some of the reports that we've been working on diligently over the past months. The session will it's comprised of three parts. So first we will have a few introductory words that I'm already doing, and then we will have two key presentations, short presentations, and then we will open for our panelists who are here with us and online to shed a bit more light on their work and then present their work on the circular economy. And then, if time allows, of course, then we will open for Q&A. So that just would like to ask all the panelists just to keep to the point and make sure that there is enough time for everything. IUCN is going to, my colleague is going to, Barbara is going to present a report that we are launching today. So it's fresh from the oven. And she will say a few words about it. And big thanks, of course, goes to the government of the Principality of Monaco, who has provided support to this report and to our work on the circular economy at large. Why we are doing all this is that there's a very simple thing that boils down the more advanced in terms of technology and society, the more dependent on nature. Yeah. So it sounds like something that goes without saying, but we are still exploring that relation between a progress development and impact on nature and biodiversity, and what the circular economy has to say about it. What are the linkages, how one can support the other, and not to come at the expense economic to come at the expense of nature. Yeah. So this is what it is about, and of course the IUCN and many partners are really very strongly engaging on that, and especially us from the European Regional Office of IUCN. We are involved in a number of initiatives, and there will be a bit more on that later today at European and global level, of course. And now with this report, we are also contributing to this discussion. There will be a few more words on the European Stakeholder platform for circular economy. There is also a leadership group on biodiversity and climate that IUCN is very actively taking part in. And of course, it has to do with what is being debated and negotiated these days here in Montreal. It's a particular Target 16, which speaks about this kind of responsible behavior in terms of a production and consumption. But of course, it has to do with many other targets. We would certainly like to see, the notion of the circular economy and especially interlinkages with nature to be included in the final document. Yeah, that is something that we are working on. Okay, so that will be from me for the beginning. I would now invite Jos Blériot from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation also to say a few words about it. One of the founding organizations of the circular economy concept, and of course, one of the key partners of IUCN in this. So just please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I hope you're hearing me okay. I would assume that's the case, unless told otherwise. It's a very kind comment that you made, but we didn't actually found the circular economy. The circular economy was a concept that did pre-exist the foundation. We certainly gave it some prominence, a business rationale for sure, and gave it a voice. But actually, it's a good introduction to what we should be talking about today, because the circular economy first emerged in Chinese policymaking as a way to secure the resource base of the economy in the context of really high growth. And the idea was to focus on value retention strategies and also making sure that the supply chains would be resilient enough in order to cope with the levels of demand that were unprecedented and expected to rise quickly. So what we're seeing here, and actually the interface that we're making between circular economy and biodiversity, is that of a contribution. What we're talking really is about the pressure that we put on finite resources and fragile ecosystems when it comes to consumption and production. We're really at the heart of it as SDG 12 here, and as recognized by the IPBES, the question is not so much if we can do a bit more with less. The question is, can we transform radically our production and consumption methods and patterns? Because this is the driver of biodiversity loss. This is the driver of pollution. This is driver of climate crisis. So addressing the triple crisis. There are strategies, of course, that can be put in place in order to alleviate those pressures, but will they be enough? And that's where really the question lies. I think in our own research, and I'm really keen to hear more about the IUCN's latest presentation as well, but what we see is the circular economy relying on three principles. One is the elimination of waste and pollution, and that has a lot to do with toxicity as well. And that helps us to reduce the threats to biodiversity. For instance, the plastics question, which is hotly debated currently at the UN level, is one of the views that we can take. Should we put more bans on single-use plastics that actually litter the environment? Yes, but bans can only go so far. So do we need to look at the upstream side of the equation, what we put on the market, both in terms of nature and in terms of volume as well, because it can choke systems, but also it depletes them. The second principle is really about keeping products and materials in use, and that helps us leave room for biodiversity, simply because what you don't waste, you don't need to replace, and therefore the pressure that you put on the natural resources and finite supplies is also greatly reduced. And that works across a variety of sectors, from textiles to the built environment. Everything that can reduce extraction helps leaving that room, and maximizing asset utilization, of course, is very important. So we need to move away from a value creation model that relies on throughput and the consumption of finite resources. And the third principle, of course, is core to what we're talking about today. It's about regenerating natural systems, closing nutrient loops that involve infrastructure as well, because it means that what we can capture in terms of value, in terms of diverting, instead of diverting to landfill and incineration, is absolutely critical. So investment in infrastructure and nature-based solutions is also absolutely key. So that's the broad picture that I wanted to paint, bearing in mind that we also link with our business network and the policymakers in order to see what concrete actions can be taken. But I think I'll leave that for the discussion later on and stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jos, for this. So we're just kind of trying to put it up a little bit. I hope that you are hearing well. To your colleagues that may help with this. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we'll just have to continue. Yeah, sure. Okay, so thanks, Jos, for this, and also just kind of painting this broad picture. What are the key elements of our thinking about the circular economy? This is extremely useful. We will move now, and I will now invite Arnaud Schwartz from the European Economic and Social Committee, and it's also heavily involved in the European Stakeholder platform on circular economy, and to say a few words about their work. So please, you can come here.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us with you today. Indeed, I'm a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, where I represent France Nature Environnement, which is a member of IUCN. The Economic Social Committee is an advisory body to the European institutions, and with the European Commission, we created something really interesting, maybe also for some other region who would want to exchange more on this topic. Our European Economic and European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform is meant to increase the exchanges and to showcase what works. This is one important point I would like to mention first and quickly. But I also have to say that, as mentioned by Jocelyn just before, what we need to tackle both issues, biodiversity, climate issues, is a new kind of economy, and this is a circular one. We, as a social and economic committee, we also always recall decision makers that we need equity in this. You have not only to think circularity in linkage with the rest of nature, but also with the weakest ones among us human beings. That said, I would like to come back to our European Circular Economy Stakeholder platform. It has been created 5 years ago. And so to say, European Commission and European Economic and Social Committee are mother and father of it. And there, all kind of stakeholders all over Europe are gathering. It's a network of networks. It goes beyond sectoral activities, of course, and highlights opportunities so to scale up effective solutions and address specific challenges. In particular, we are driving the circular economy in the member states, in regional and local governments, and among civil society organizations and businesses. We are also strengthening cooperation among stakeholders to facilitate exchange of expertise, good practices, knowledge, and lessons learned in the circular economy. In identifying social, economic, and cultural barriers is also one of our tasks. And last but not least, I will mention again what was already said. We also have there a leadership working group on biodiversity where IUCN is actively generating debates, and we will now have the pleasure to listen to one of the most recent findings they made. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, no, and we know that the European Union, European Commission, and all the several mechanisms within have been and are pioneering and advancing the concept of the circular economy. So thanks for that. I know will be part of the panel, so there will be a bit another intervention from him, and of course, if you have any questions for him, he will be happy to answer. Now, I know that eyes are cast on IUCN in a way, because we are going to present some of the key findings from our report toward a circular economy that begins and ends in nature. And for that, I would then invite our colleague Barbara Pia Oberč, who is joining online from our regional office in Brussels, to take the floor and present the report. So please, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Boris. I hope that you can hear me fine, and I'll start by sharing my slides. Oh, I'm not able to.
Barbara, just a moment, because there was something that they were just changing here, technicians. So just a moment. I mean, it was fair before.
If it's easier, you can also show my slides directly, as I think you have them, but let me know.
Now we can hear you.
Can I share my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, please. I mean, we can hear you. That's all fine.
It says that I can't, that the host has disabled participant screen sharing, so I'm having some difficulties with that. Can try again. Nope. Okay. Here we go. Can you see?
Yes, put it in presentation mode.
Yep, I will. Just a minute. Everything has shifted a little bit on my screen. All right. So thanks already for the introduction. So I'm Pia Oberč. I'm working as a policy and project officer at ICN's European Regional Office in Brussels, which is where I'm joining you from today. And I will be launching a report today that explores the relationship between the circular economy and biodiversity, and in particular, these two policy areas. So as many of you are joining us in Montreal, at this long-awaited biodiversity conference, you are, of course, well aware of the existential crises that we are facing, but I can remind you, of course, that the biodiversity challenge alone is enormous. Based on data collected by ICN's Red List of Threatened Species, IPBES estimates that about 1 million species are threatened with extinction today. And the International Resource Panel estimates that more than 90% of biodiversity loss is due to the extraction and processing of natural resources. Now, aside from conservation and restoration activities, in this context, the circular economy can truly be a great tool to tackle these very key drivers of biodiversity loss. And to look into this in greater detail, during the past year, there has been, and there continues to be, an important effort to see how the circular economy can truly contribute. So as was highlighted by previous speakers, to give you a bit of context on our work, ICN has been a coordination group member of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform since 2020. And you can see some other partners you might recognize on the slide, and a good few are participating in this event today. And this year we launched the leadership group on biodiversity and climate, which we are also sharing. A number of coordination group members, part of this effort, now also members of the new leadership group, each set out to produce a report examining this circular economy and biodiversity nexus from slightly different angles. And on the slide are some of the reports that have come out so far. INEC's paper outlined how the protection of biodiversity and natural ecosystems is often a missing link in the circular economy discussion. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Joss mentioned, of course, their paper outlined the ways in which the circular economy can truly tackle biodiversity loss. And SITRA, who's also with us today, their study developed a comprehensive modeling approach to assess how much biodiversity loss can be halted in a circular economy scenario to 2050. And I will mention, of course, as well, that the European Environment Agency, Tobias with us today, they're coming out with a report soon as well. But today, I am happy to be able to present to you IUCN's report, which is being launched today. So towards a circular economy that begins and ends in nature is now available online. And before I dive into a brief presentation of the content, I would like to again expressly thank the government of the Principality of Monaco, who have been supporting this and more of our work related to the circular economy over the past years. So what specific angle or focus does our report take? So we enter into this discussion as an environmental organization. So we had biodiversity as our starting point, but also coming from ICN Brussels office working on policy, we also took on a policy focus. We examined potential challenges and opportunities in existing relevant policy, aiming to identify some ways forward to more closely interlink the transition to a circular economy with the protection and restoration of nature. And we don't aim to provide a comprehensive or in-depth exploration of all of the possible links between the two policy areas, because there are many, and nor do we propose yet, or we don't propose a definitive way forward, but are trying to shed some light on some of the ways in which the two areas could mutually reinforce one another. And we start by outlining the general policy context at the global and the EU level. Of course, in analyzing the work of the CBD, there is as yet no direct mention of the circular economy, but these references are not absent, they are rather implicit. The draft post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework contains important draft targets. Some of them have been mentioned already on pollution, target 7, production, target 10, consumption, target 16. We will still need to see if a clear mention to the circular economy will be included in the adopted framework in a few days' time. But much of our policy analysis then in the report focused on the EU level, namely looking at the European Green Deal. The Green Deal was an incredibly important step toward the further integration of the two policy agendas. Two key strategies came out under this umbrella, and each of them vital to how the respective sector will be shaped in the coming years. And I'm speaking of the Circular Economy Action Plan and the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030. These are the two policy files that our report examined in greater detail. And we did a deep dive where we focused on the key value chain in the Circular Economy Action Plan that is really the most impactful for biodiversity. This is the food, water, and nutrients value chain. We took a closer look at 4 key areas, part of this value chain, and I'll say a little bit about each one of them. The sustainable use of renewable bio-based materials is one of those aims. And this section is very much focused on the bioeconomy. The bioeconomy perhaps poses the greatest impact to biodiversity through land and resource use. For example, a shift from fossil-based to bio-based materials is an important objective in this context. But such a push could lead to unintended trade-offs. For example, if an increased demand for timber as a sustainable building material would lead to loss of a primary forest, for example. But at the same time, this also means that a circular bioeconomy has incredible potential to tackle biodiversity loss. And I'll mention some of the findings from SITRA's recent study. A shift to a circular food and agriculture sector, they found would make the greatest contribution to biodiversity recovery, constituting 73% of the total contribution to the circular scenario in the study. Looking at the reduction of food waste, we know that targeting food waste is incredibly crucial, as the FAO estimates we currently waste about 1/3 of what we produce. But while reducing food waste and loss is important, it's not quite enough to address biodiversity loss, because to really think in terms of the whole system, next to how much food we are producing or wasting, it's important to examine also how we are producing this food. There are a number of sustainable agricultural practices which align well with the principles of the circular economy in reducing pollution and waste through a reduction in pesticide and fertilizer applications, enabling nitrogen and other nutrient cycling, improving water efficiency and soil quality, and so on. And it's also important to examine the kind of food that we are producing. We are well aware of by now that meat and dairy production is incredibly land and resource intensive. Moving to the substitution of single-use products by reusable alternatives in food services, maybe one thing to mention here would be that efforts could extend to tackling consumption as well. For instance, if the production of reusable products, like the production of any product, also has its own environmental impact, then reusable products will only really relieve pressure on the environment the longer that they remain in use, and that is informed by how we consume. And on the efficient water reuse in agriculture and industrial processes and the sustainable management of nutrients, including wastewater treatment, another aim in the Circular Economy Action Plan. The actions outlined here to eliminate pollution are vital to restore freshwater ecosystems and the natural functions of rivers, and facilitating the reuse of water. These actions should help achieve better quality surface waters, groundwater. But for example, it is also necessary that the conservation status of species and habitats is respected in water reuse strategic policy through, for example, the preservation of ecological flows of water bodies. Now, for each of these 4 areas, we looked into what the Circular Economy Action Plan aims to do and tried to see how these aims might contribute to the goals outlined in the Biodiversity Strategy to 2030. Now I'm putting this word cloud up. Through this exercise, through this deep dive, we have actually managed to touch on a whole host of policies that are or that would be important to more closely consider when seeking further policy integration between the circular economy and biodiversity. Closer alignment, for example, with the farm to fork strategy, with the common agricultural policy, with the nature directives would still be needed to strengthen the role of the circular economy in addressing biodiversity loss. Now, we didn't do a deep dive in each of these policies, although that could be an interesting and useful exercise, but this is sort of to show you, to demonstrate just how many different policy areas become relevant in this intersection between the circular economy and biodiversity. Bringing us back out of this deep dive, we outline a number of key conclusions and potential ways forward. And some things emerge as crucial that I will highlight. Circular economy policy thus far has not focused too much on the biological resources in the economy. Rather, it has been more focused on the technical components, on the products and materials that undergo reuse, repair, remanufacture, recycling. But it is those biological resources, biomass, the bioeconomy that are really impactful for the biodiversity question. Certain sectors, such as food and agriculture, as well as forestry, they hold significant potential benefits for nature and biodiversity if they were to become fully circular. Land use needs to be of central concern for circular economy policy, especially by supporting sustainable land use and agricultural and forestry practices. More attention will need to be paid to extraction and production, encompassing the whole life cycle, not only the end of life stage, waste, and ultimately also keeping in line with the circular economy in terms of the waste hierarchy. A lot can be achieved through tackling consumption. There, prevention is the first priority. I will leave you with 3 final takeaways. So to support the transition to circular economy with nature at its core, as my presentation has at least alluded to, it is fundamental to enhance policy coherence. And we are thinking of a systemic approach in this sense, in terms of policy integration, but also in terms of practice, when you're considering the whole system, technical and biological cycles, waste and production and consumption. Conservation and restoration will remain crucial activities in the fight against the interdependent crises of biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation, and climate change. But of course, the transition to a circular economy that both begins and ends in nature and that transforms these unsustainable production and consumption systems that drive biodiversity loss is an invaluable tool to help us achieve our fast approaching environmental targets. And I can end there. Thank you. I hope I was efficient.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Barbara, for this. Thanks for keeping it to the point. Of course, I invite all the participants to look into the report that contains much more information. This was just a very brief overview of what the report is and what are the key findings. And I mean, surprisingly, we are still exploring that relation between the economy and natural resources. And at the end of the day, in one way or another, all the production is being resourced from nature. Yeah? So that's something just to keep in mind. And we do hope that this report is providing a meaningful contribution to the discussion that we are having. Yeah. So Barbara will stay with us, and she will be part of the panel. So of course, if there are any questions now or later, you're invited to pose them. Thanks once again, Barbara. And now we will move to the second or third part of the session, the final one, which is a panel discussion. So we have 2 panelists we have here on site. We just kind of invite them to join the panel. This is a little bit improvised in this room. We have Emma Sairanen of SITRA, was mentioned already. It's an it's an innovation hub and also investing a lot in the circular economy. So we will also hear from Emma about their recent research, and of course we have Arnaud Schwartz, and he will also join the panel and also speak a little bit more about the work that they are doing. And then we have a panelist who are online. So we have already Joss was introduced and Barbara was introduced, and I really have a great pleasure also to having a European Environment Agency. So Tobias Nielsen is with us and also speak about their EEA's work on that. And as you can see, and also from Barbara's presentation, there is a lot going on at the moment in Europe, and we are very glad that we are advancing this agenda and hopefully contributing to debate at global, regional, and national level as well. So without further ado, I will now invite Emma just to say a few words about their recent findings. There was a modeling exercise that they did also report. As far as I understand, there was also a presentation here in Montreal about that. So Emma, please, I mean, if you can just summarize a little bit, you know, especially focusing on certain industries and the choice of the industries and linkages between the circular economy and biodiversity or the use of natural resources. And for that, we have a microphone. So.
Thank you. Many thanks for the organizers for inviting SITRA to this very the chair.
Yeah, I can.
Thank you for inviting us here to this panel. I'm really excited to be here. I have been following the negotiations under the CBD for 1.5 years now, and as Barbara unfortunately said, circular economy is not really mentioned a lot of times, but I think we can all agree that even though it's not explicitly in the text, there are many key targets where we actually need circular economy for implementation. So I think it's really important that we are discussing this topic here. And I would also like to say congratulations for IUCN for your super interesting report. I really liked how you're highlighting the need to consider circular economy in land use policies, because that is something we also found crucial, that biomass is actually really critical in this issue of biodiversity loss and circular economy. But then towards our report, earlier this year, we released a groundbreaking report where we, for the first time ever, quantified the linkages between circular economy and biodiversity loss. Tackling root causes, halting biodiversity loss through circular economy is the name of our report. And what we basically did, we modeled land use changes using the Biodiversity Impactness Index. And to do this exercise, we chose 4 key sectors of the global economy that have big impacts on biodiversity, especially biodiversity that is caused by biodiversity loss caused by land use changes. Land use change. So we don't have any sectors that have key impacts to waterways, for example, which is something exciting that IUCN has then looked at in their report. And then we also looked at sectors that have key potential through circular interventions to actually have positive impacts on biodiversity. And after looking through these 2 screens, we ended up with 4 sectors. So the report in the end looks at agriculture and food, forestry, built environment, and fibers and textiles. And what we did was we looked at key interventions in these 4 sectors and modeled how these circular interventions could impact land use change, and through impacts of land use change could help biodiversity. And our model went up to 2050. And if we go quickly through the main results, firstly, a very positive and exciting result. Actually, if we look at the model through these circular interventions in just 4 key sectors of the world economy, we would be able to halt and even reverse biodiversity loss by the year 2035. So we will be able to bring biodiversity back to the levels of year 2000 by 2035. Really exciting. The second result, as Barbara already highlighted, is that the food and agriculture sector is really key. It has the biggest impacts for biodiversity and also biggest potential for change. And their food loss that has been discussed for a long time already is key, but even more important is the transitions of what is the food we actually produce. So shifting away from animal intensive proteins towards alternative options that are less land uses, less land use intensive is the word I was looking for, and also less input intensive. So especially, for example, plant-based proteins where we can learn from nature, and by learning from nature, we can actually reduce pollution and inputs in our food system. And then the third key result, as also highlighted by Barbara, is that through these circular intervention needs and simultaneously have some biodiversity, but also on climate and resilience and reducing pollution. So yes, I would be more than happy to talk more about that, but I guess we'll give the floor for other panelists as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Emma. Thanks a lot of course for all the all the insights and all the knowledge that you are providing to this discussion, as you mentioned, kind of exploring still what are the industries and what are the linkages, and thanks also for this optimistic note that comes out of your report. It's always good to hear that the word of optimism that there is a way forward in recovering and restoring. I would now turn to Tobias Nilsson of the EEA and European Environment Agency. So proudly wearing that flag that you can see, and panelists that's joining online. And maybe Tobias, also for you, just a few words about the work of EEA in this direction, and in particular how the findings of your research and how the data that you're providing can also help policymakers shape up the policies and regulation around this area in Europe, but also globally and nationally. So please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I also hope that everybody can hear me right. So we, in our report, thumbs up, great. We also identify 3 key intersections between the circular economy and how they can reduce the impact of the production and consumption system. And the first one is resource efficiency. So that's really at the core of circular economy. And by reusing, recycling, and also reducing our use, we can use the resources we have more efficiently, and this will lead to lower impacts on biodiversity. The second sort of intersection is on eliminating waste. So both making sure that we are not ending up with waste, but that is recircled in the economy, and also that we eliminate some of the more harmful substances, both as they are less recyclable, but also because they have a huge impact when they're in nature or even in our bodies. And the third one, which is the one that needs, I guess, more of a push, is what we call the sustainable sourcing. And that's just to ensure that the materials we do source are done so in a sustainable manner, that they have as little impact on nature as possible, and also that we push it and we move towards a more regenerative approaches, so that we, in all simplicity, try to give back more than we extract from nature when these things are possible. We believe that for this to be realizable, or to be, we think that the design stage is actually is really critical. So both in making sure that the products and the services that are made are as circular as possible, and also that the designers really think about the materials that they use, so preferably secondary raw materials if possible. We also, as we've heard before, I think that we really need a systemic approach here. We really need to, for the different sectors, to bridge the different sectors, to bridge the different stages of the life cycle, and also to, as we're doing here, sort of bridge different communities, circular economy experts talking to biodiversity experts. So some of these are absolutely fundamental. We also think that this, of course, will require a lot of different innovations, regenerative agriculture has been mentioned, making sure that we're reusing building materials, and that our products, they last for as long as possible. And also that we're consuming in different ways, as we've heard, moving from a meat-based to more plant-based diet. And then lastly, we think that we really need a broad stakeholder engagement. We need a lot of different areas of expertise and a lot of different types of knowledges to make this happen. But we actually think, we think that this is really key when we're talking about the ambitions that we're trying to achieve here in Montreal, that circular economy will be a part of or there will be some kind of room for addressing these key underlying drivers that the production consumption system is, and also that we have some kind of options for how to approach it, how to deal with it, so that circular economy or something similar is actually part of the agreement. I think that would be absolutely crucial. And then when we turn our eyes to what we to the EU, we also think that the circular economy, of course, has grown a lot politically. It's become a political priority. We've seen the circular economy strategy, the circular economy action plan, but we need to remind ourselves that the circular economy is not the end in itself. It's a mean towards an end. And reducing biodiversity should be one of those overarching aims of circular economy. And therefore, we need to make this a more biodiversity inclusive circular economy, so that we look back at this in 10 or 20 years, we can see one of the things that we have achieved with the circular economy is not only higher recycling rates, but also that we have helped reduce the pressures on biodiversity.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And once again, just as with all other speakers, thanks a lot for the great work that you are doing on this and your intervention. And of course, I invite all the participants to visit your data sources and look into your work on the circular economy. But this is just a perfect segue, because we'll stay online with just now. And just as you mentioned, so we know that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is really very pushing very strong when it comes to the circular economy. What Tobias mentioned about is changing angles a little bit and really trying to not just to understand what are the linkages and impacts and pressures, but to be more biodiversity inclusive or thoughtful a circular economy. So from that point of view, maybe just a few words from you. There was a lot and still a lot of discussion about is a value chain and production and material and consumption and waste, but now this little bit stronger angle on biodiversity. So all the impacts on biodiversity and basically how circular economy can support a biodiversity recovery. So maybe just to kind of to say a word or two about that sort of a shift in the landscape and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I completely agree with what I've heard from friends and colleagues at the IUCN, SITRA, and the EEA. Of course, the delivery mechanism, which is the circular economy, is precisely aimed at delivering the outcomes that we're looking. And this is not about better waste management or a bit of incremental change. It really is challenging the underlying fundamental structure of the economy, because if we consider that consumption and volume and throughput and sales of stuff is the driver of value creation, then we also have to be mindful of the fact that there are systems, there are mechanisms, there are accounting rules, there are incentives that favor that. And short of really asking those big questions, we're going to try and turn a train which is firmly on its rails, and that's never very easy to do. So looking at those underlying, what actually in the cost structure of the economy is an incentive to do harm to nature, to destroy biodiversity. Of course, it's never going to be labeled that way, but what is the outcome of some of the mechanisms that we have that favor economically certain activities over others? Do we really measure the good impact? We talk about nature-based solution. It's really hard to define. Most people don't know what they are. Certainly in the business community, people have only a vague idea of what they are. And also, how do you monitor that? What criteria do you do? At the risk of stating the obvious, I think, first of all, businesses should really assess the biodiversity impacts and their dependencies and set science-based targets in order to know exactly in the value chain, you never a neutral component. You have an impact on the people you work with, on the resources and the stocks that you also depend on for your production methods. So knowing that would be the first steps. And of course, the SBTN, the Science Based Targets Network, has developed really strong guidance on this. So this should be the first port of call. And then secondly, once you have that assessment in place, it's about identifying those circular economy opportunities that help meet those targets. Is it about changing the feedstock, moving to different materials, eliminating some additives that are impossible to recycle and therefore to reuse? Is it moving away completely from some virgin materials because there's enough availability of high quality secondary raw ones? Of course, the cases will depend. And in our report, The Nature Imperative, you have a few examples of the businesses that we've talked to who have done that impact assessment and as a result have changed their practices. And of course, collaboration across value chains is also extremely important. And it could be about material sharing. It could be, in some cases, about industrial symbiosis methods. That means that one resource, one waste, to use that word, becomes the resource for another business, because actually it flows naturally in the cycle. But if those connections aren't made, then those materials will end up as waste at the detriment of needing to produce more and ending up where they shouldn't in the first place. Tobias mentioned design, and I think this is an absolutely critical element, is the upstream nature of the circular economy here. It is about standardizing across value chains, sometimes also the design and the materials, to favor volume and therefore have quicker, high quality recycling. If everyone deals with the same sort of materials and they're specified to go back to productive loop at the end of one useful life, then of course we're going to drastically reduce the need for virgin materials. And I will, at this stage, remind our audience and ourselves that the Circular Economy Action Plan of the European Commission is subtitled "For a Clean and Competitive Europe." If you don't clean up the pipe, there's no way that we're going to end up with a circular economy. And at the moment, there are too many legacy materials that we don't know what to do with. This is not going to happen unless we really look upstream at what impacts do we have when we extract, what materials actually end up in the market, because it's really well and good to say, oh, my stuff is biosourced. If it's biosourced, but it remains a plastic that nature cannot absorb, I don't really care where it comes from. I want to know where it ends up. Is the value retained? Is it conducive to regeneration of natural ecosystems? That should be the criteria.
Thanks a lot for this. And maybe just one last question before opening the floor. We'll have a few minutes. It's just that I know, just pick up on what you said, it has to be a socially just. So in that regard, the stakeholder platform, how it really contributes to that dialogue, to be inclusive and to be a sort of a consensus based, where this social justice element comes in.
You have all kind of stakeholders in this platform, so also people really aware of what's going on for some of us here and elsewhere. When I say here, it's thinking we are in Europe, talking together in this platform. But what we need to see is that there's not enough for the greed of everyone. So we also have to slow down this economy so that it becomes circular and that everything begins and ends up in nature. And when you slow down, this means you have less impacts too much. You respect more natural cycles. The regenerative side of our economy has to be strengthened, and in order to be socially fair, we also have to ask ourselves, what do we really need to make it peaceful, happy? Are all the things that are, or services that are used today really needed, essential? What can we do apart? And how can we then have work to share with everyone?
Yep. Okay, thanks. It's a very challenging task, of course, in terms of changing patterns, and not just production and consumption patterns, but also changing sort of, approaches and paradigms in this respect. Yeah, we are all consumers. So we stop here and then open the floor. If there are any questions, we have, a few minutes left. Maybe just to pick up one or two questions, if there are any, before closing this discussion. So please, the floor is yours. Yeah. So for any of the panelists. We have one.
Yes, George Kelly of Earth Recovery Partners, and we've been working with a circular economy enterprise who has facilities in Serbia and the Netherlands. And one of the questions that was raised is, if there are enterprises out there that now have a new disclosure requirement for biodiversity, because we have a new global framework, Could that enterprise look to any of the data points you guys have mentioned to showcase the crediting or the benefits in a realistic way in any report?
Question goes to someone specifically or just okay, we have another one. So okay, so there is whoever wants to pick up on this question, especially this pertains to the private sector and industry, I think. Please, panelists.
Well, I would say that the report we have created, it really has the quantified elements, which might be interesting, but it is a global modeling exercise that we have done. So then it doesn't really always translate to each sector locally, but maybe a good reference point. And I think something that might be of interest in Finland, because we heard about the science-based targets for nature, and that is being right now piloted. And in Finland, we're also doing a pilot on that. And in this pilot exercise, we're working with 10 companies from Finland. And while the companies are setting their science-based targets for nature, we have actually asked them to look at circular economy as a tool to reach these targets. So we have kind of linked circular economy into the science-based targets for nature. Really interesting.
Okay, thanks, Emma, for this. We have one more question, so please.
Hi, Jenny Davis from the Consulting. Just a question. So all of you have looked at circular economy and biodiversity. There's a lot going on circular economy anyway, without looking at biodiversity. Is what you guys have found means that people need to do things differently in how they're doing circular economy? Or is it just a reinforcing reason to do the things that people are starting to do on circular economy?
Okay, so it's a general question. Whoever feels Tobias, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think we looked at some examples as well. So what are good examples for how to achieve this? And the one thing we learned from that is that there are a lot of the things that we already are doing on circular economy that can have a co-benefit on biodiversity, as we're using our resources more effectively or efficiently. But we also found that very few businesses or others really factor in biodiversity when they're working with circular economy. So that's probably something where we have to, if we're talking about how can we do things different, and I think that's really trying to get that biodiversity angle in from the get-go, when businesses or others are trying to talk about biodiversity and circular economy, because the two ones are interlinked, but we really need to think about how do we move it in from the very beginning.
Thanks a lot. And Arnaud was also wanted to say, I see that Josh was nodding, so I guess in agreement to what Tobias just said, but please, Arnaud.
Yeah, definitely. Because Jocelyn mentioned, for example, bio-based plastics. They are still plastics. If in the end, they cannot be assimilated without toxicity for the whole living chain. So we have to rethink our processes when we conceive things.
One more point that I think is super interesting into this discussion, because I think the angle of biodiversity just adds something more to circular economy. And one aspect there could be that when we think about circular economy, we have thought about the reducing, avoiding, and impacts. But then when we think about the biodiversity angle, one key aspect that we have mentioned many times today is considering biomass. And there, one key aspect would be how can we get more value from standing biomass, living biomass, and something that companies are doing. For example, we heard an interesting example from Ecuador about how they are in communities, they are growing these seeds on trees, and then they are using these seeds to create cosmetic products. And they are actually getting much more value from this biomass by leaving the trees to grow and using the seeds of the trees than by cutting the trees down. So this is kind of something new that we can think as circular economy as well, and add biodiversity into the equation.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, just as suspected, we won't have enough time for really to unpack this, but it's an incredibly interesting area of work, and not just interesting, but very important. So in the remaining 2 minutes, then I'll ask maybe Joss first, if there is a 1 minute takeaway for you from this discussion in general, from your work on the circular economy, biodiversity, climate, and of course, in light of the GBF.
Yeah, well, I'll give you two very quickly. One is, first of all, we're talking about something extremely specific, which is biodiversity, and it's often, of course, conflated with general environmentalism and conservation. And the diversity element of it, the number of species and how they interact, is really terribly hard to monitor and to also stick to. It's generally, biodiversity is often used as a proxy for ecosystem and natural health, but it's far more specific than that. So how do you get to a simple expression of it, and how do you get to a simple enough assessment of that very specific aspect is probably the key. So it's diving into the specificity of the topic and coming up with something that manages to focus the attention and make sure that we can monitor it and make it progress in a way which is, of course, scientific, but also that can be taken up by investors, by policymakers, and by the general public who demand answers from their economic stakeholders.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. And the final word goes to Barbara. So now that the report is out, so what would be your main takeaway? And of course, here that we are in this amidst this discussion about the post 2020 global biodiversity framework, what comes next?
Thank you, Boris. And yeah, just to say, 1 hour is definitely not enough to get through such rich material. We have had a really rich discussion on this, and it's only recently begun that we've been working together, and this is growing, this looking into the nexus between the circular economy, biodiversity, and climate. This is what a discussion that will continue in the future for sure. It is something that the leadership group will be taking into the next year. And we really need to ensure that this nexus is that there's policy integration. We're looking at the whole system, and that circular economy solutions are climate solutions, are also biodiversity solutions, are also nature-based solutions. So that would be kind of the message going forward, and looking forward to the next step for this group. And anyone else who wants to join in, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this, and thanks a lot for congratulations for the report. So thanks a lot to all the to your patients and the audience here for your questions. Of course, we are just opening this discussion up. Of course, I mean there are really two main takeaways for me. That is integration and delivery, and that has to happen at all levels. We hope that will happen here in Montreal and in the follow-up, but also through many mechanisms, and some of them being presented today at regional, national, and local level. So once again, thanks a lot for this. I hope that you are getting out of this discussion and recharged, and there will be a stronger voice for the circular economy in biodiversity debate, and vice versa. And big thanks goes to Tommaso here, who was just kind of not just behind the scene for helping this and making this happen. And I wish you a very successful participation in the discussion. Yeah. Last not least, big thanks to our generous donor, the Principality of Monaco, for supporting this report. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.